Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're enjoying these untold Hollywood secrets, please hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking celebrity revelations. Your support means the world to us. Now let's get into this amazing story. It was October 15th, 1958, and Doris Day was standing in the parking lot of Columbia Records, tears streaming down her face as she watched Dean Martin drive away in his Cadillac convertible. They had just finished recording what would become one of the most beautiful duets in music history, but the real story wasn't about the music they had made together. It was about the secret love affair that had been consuming both of their lives for over 2 years. An affair that had nearly destroyed 2 marriages, scandalized Hollywood's inner circle, and cried one of the most passionate and dangerous relationships in entertainment history. What happened between America's sweetheart and the king of cool was supposed to remain buried forever. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and this is the story of the secret affair that almost brought down 2 of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Now, let me back up here and explain how Doris Day, the wholesome girl next door, and Dean Martin, the smooth Italian crooner, ended up in the most unlikely and explosive love affair of the night. The first meeting between Doris and Dean happened at a party at Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs compound in March 9. Doris was there with her husband Martin Melcher, and Dean was with his wife John. On the surface, they couldn't have been more different. Doris represented everything pure and innocent about American entertainment. Dean was the embodiment of sophisticated, slightly dangerous charm. They were like fire and ice, recalled actress Janet Leigh, who witnessed their first conversation that night. You could feel the electricity between them from across the room. But what drew them together wasn't physical attraction, at least, not at first. It was their shared experience of being misunderstood by the very industry that had made them famous. Doris felt trapped by her wholesome image, forced to play the same innocent character in movie after movie. Dean felt pigeonholed as a lightweight entertainer, not taken seriously as an artist, despite his incredible vocal talent. They both felt like prisoners of their own success, said music producer Mitch Miller, who worked with both of them. That gave them an immediate connection. Their first real relation lasted until 3 a.m., long after their respective spouses had gone home. Dean understood me in a way that nobody else ever had. Doris confided to her close friend Kay Ballard years later. He saw past the image to the real person underneath. What started as friendship quickly became something much more dangerous. Actually, let me tell you about the moment when they both knew their relationship had crossed a line. It happened 3 months later, during the recording of a Christmas album that featured several duets between major recording stars. Doris and Dean were paired together for a version of Baby It's Cold Outside. The song, with its playful back and forth between a man trying to convince a woman to stay and a woman making excuses to leave, was already suggestive. But when Doris and Dean performed it, something magical and terrifying happened. They weren't singing to the microphone, recalled sound engineer Tom Dowd, who was there that day. They were singing to each other. The chemistry was so intense that everyone in the studio felt like they were intruding on a private moment. When they finished the song, the studio was completely silent. Even the hardened recording professionals were affected by what they had just witnessed. Doris and Dean looked at each other across the microphones, and both of them knew that their lives had just changed forever. That was the moment they fell in love, said Kay Ballard. Not just attraction, not just friendship, but real, consuming, dangerous love. But they were both married. Doris had been with Martin Melcher since 1951, and while the marriage had its problems, she was committed to making it work. Dean had been married to John since 1949, and they had 4 children together. For several months, Doris and Dean tried to maintain their relationship as just friendship. They would meet for coffee, have long phone conversations, and occasionally see each other at industry events. But the attraction was too strong to resist. The affair began in earnest in the summer of 1957, when both of their spouses were out of town at the same time. Martin Melcher was in New York negotiating contracts for Doris's next film. John Martin was in Ohio visiting her family with the children. Dean called Doris on a Thursday evening and asked if she wanted to have dinner. Just dinner, he said, between friends. They both knew it was a lie. They met at a small restaurant in Malibu, far from the usual Hollywood spots where they might be recognized. They talked for hours about their careers, their frustrations, their dreams. Dean made me feel like I was interesting, Doris said years later. Not just pretty, not just talented, but genuinely fascinating as a person. I had never felt that before. When Dean offered to drive her home, Doris didn't hesitate to accept. But instead of going to her house in Beverly Hills, they ended up at Dean's bachelor apartment in Hollywood, a place he kept for when he was working late at the studio. What happened that night changed both of their lives forever. Don't forget to comment below and let us know what other Hollywood affairs you'd like to hear about. The affair that followed was passionate, secret, and absolutely consuming for both of them. They would meet whenever their schedules allowed, sometimes at Dean's apartment, sometimes at Doris's house when Martin was away, and occasionally at a discreet hotel in Santa Barbara. They were like teenagers, recalled Jimmy Van Heusen, a songwriter who was close to Dean. Dean would get this dreamy look whenever someone mentioned Doris's name. He was completely gone. But maintaining a secret relationship in Hollywood is nearly impossible, especially when you're two of the biggest stars in the business. The first person to suspect something was wrong was Martin Melcher. He began noticing that Doris was different, happier, more radiant, but also more distant from him. Doris had always been devoted to Martin despite his faults, said her longtime housekeeper, Katie Thompson. But suddenly she seemed elsewhere, like her mind was always somewhere else. Martin hired a private investigator to follow Doris, but she and Dean were too careful. They never met in obvious places, never stayed too long, and always had plausible explanations for their whereabouts. But the emotional evidence was harder to hide. Doris began turning down film projects that would take her away from Los Angeles for extended periods. She started asking Martin to reschedule business trips, so she would be available for certain recording sessions. Most tellingly, she began demanding more creative control over her music, insisting on songs that showcased a more mature, sophisticated side of her voice. Doris was evolving as an artist, explained Mitch Miller. She wanted to sing love songs that reflected real adult emotions, not the innocent puppy love of her earlier hits. The change in her music was directly related to her relationship with Dean. He was encouraging her to take artistic risks, to show the world the depth and complexity that he saw in her. Dean, for his part, was going through his own transformation. His wife John noticed that he was drinking less, staying home more when he wasn't working, and showing a new interest in serious music rather than just commercial entertainment. Dean was becoming the man he had always wanted to be, said Jerry Lewis, who was still performing with Dean at the time. But none of us understood why. The answer was Doris. She saw potential in Dean that others missed, and she encouraged him to pursue more challenging material. Actually, you know what's really interesting? Their affair produced some of the best work either of them ever did. During the height of their relationship, Doris recorded Secret Love, which became one of her biggest hits, and won the Academy Award for Best Song. The emotion in her voice was real. She was singing about her feelings for Dean. Dean, meanwhile, recorded Memories Are Made of This, a song about treasuring special moments with someone you love. Everyone assumed it was about his wife, but people close to him knew the truth. They were writing their love letters to each other in song, said songwriter Sammy Kahn, and the whole world was listening. But the intensity of their relationship was also creating tremendous strain on both of their marriages. Doris began having frequent headaches and insomnia. Martin noticed that she was often moody and distracted. Dean started having arguments with John about things that had never bothered him before. He became critical of their social life, their friends, even their home. The affair was tearing both of them apart, observed Kay Ballard. They were so happy when they were together but miserable the rest of the time. The crisis came in the spring of 1958, when both Martin Melcher and John Martin began to suspect the truth. Martin had noticed that Doris's recording schedule seemed to coincide perfectly with Dean's studio time. John had found hotel receipts in Dean's jacket for places he claimed never to have visited. The confrontation happened on the same night, but in different places. Martin confronted Doris at their Beverly Hills home, after she returned from what she claimed was a business dinner with her agent. "Who were you really with tonight?" Martin demanded. Doris tried to maintain her story, but Martin had been building evidence for months. "I know about Dean Martin," he said. "I know about the hotels, the secret meetings, all of it." Doris broke down and confessed everything. Meanwhile, across town, John Martin was having a similar confrontation with Dean. She knew Dean told his friend Jimmy Van Heusen later. She had known for months. She was just waiting for the right moment to force the issue. Both marriages were now in crisis, but the real shock was yet to come. Both Martin Melcher and John Martin made the same demand. The affair had to end immediately, or there would be divorces, public scandals, and career destruction for everyone involved. But neither Doris nor Dean was willing to give up what they had found together. The next few weeks were the most dangerous period of their relationship. Both of them were under constant surveillance from their spouses, but they were also more desperate than ever to be together. They began taking enormous risks, meeting in public places, making coded phone calls, and even considering running away together. They talked seriously about leaving their spouses and moving to Europe, revealed Jimmy Van Huysen years later. Dean was ready to give up everything: his career, his children, his life in America. But reality began to intrude on their fantasy. Doris realized that leaving Martin would mean giving up custody of her son Terry, whom she adored. Dean understood that abandoning his 4 children would destroy him emotionally, and both of them knew that a public scandal would end their careers permanently. The decision to end the affair was made during their last meeting, in Dean's apartment on October 15, 1958, the same day I mentioned at the beginning of this story. They had just finished recording their duet, and both of them knew it would be their final collaboration for a very long time. "We can't keep doing this," Doris said, tears streaming down her face. "We're going to destroy everything. Our families, our careers, ourselves." Dean knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. "I love you," he said simply. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Doris replied. "But love isn't always enough." They agreed that they would have no contact for at least a year, hoping that time and distance would help them get over each other. It was the most difficult decision either of them had ever made. The aftermath of the affair affected both of their lives for years to come. Doris threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, making some of her most successful films during the early 1960s. But friends noticed that she seemed sadder, more resigned to the limitations of her life. "Doris was never quite the same after Dean," observed Kay Ballard. "She had experienced real passion, and everything else seemed pale by comparison." Dean, meanwhile, began the period of his career that would make him most famous: his partnership with Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. But those who knew him well understood that his legendary cool was partly a defense mechanism. "Dean became more guarded after Doris," said Jerry Lewis. "He never again allowed himself to be that vulnerable with anyone." Both of their marriages survived, but they were forever changed. Doris and Martin Melcher stayed together until his death in 1968. But their relationship never recovered its former closeness. Martin became more controlling, more suspicious, and more determined to manage every aspect of Doris's career. Dean and John Martin remained married until 1973, but Dean became increasingly distant and spent more and more time away from home. The affair remained a secret for decades. It was only after both Dean and Doris had died that close friends began revealing the truth about their relationship. "It was the great love story that nobody knew about," said Sammy Kahn. "Two people who found perfect love at the worst possible time." Looking back at their affair, it's clear that it changed both Doris Day and Dean Martin, as artists and as people. For Doris, it showed her that she was capable of passion and depth that went far beyond her wholesome image. For Dean, it proved that he could love someone completely, without reservation or cynicism. But it also showed them both that sometimes the greatest loves are the ones that can't be sustained. Their secret affair lasted only 2 years, but its impact on their lives was permanent. They had found something rare and beautiful together, but they were wise enough to let it go before it destroyed them. The love that nearly destroyed both their marriages ultimately saved them by teaching them about sacrifice, responsibility, and the sometimes painful difference between love and life. Doris Day and Dean Martin never spoke publicly about their affair, but their music from that period tells the whole story. In their voices, you can hear the joy, the passion, the heartbreak, and ultimately the acceptance of two people who loved deeply, but chose duty over desire. It was, as Dean Martin might have said, a love worth remembering, even if it couldn't last forever. The secret affair between America's sweetheart and the king of cool remains one of Hollywood's most poignant untold love stories. A reminder that even the biggest stars are, in the end, just human beings looking for love and connection, and sometimes finding it in all the wrong places.